Live. We are live with David. Hey, David. Look, I'll just start the show this way. All right. He's one of the smartest people I talked to. I told you this before we started recording. I've had the pleasure of having numerous conversations with you, probably more than 2 dozen over the 3 years. We got to know each other during COVID.
That's right.
And you're going to be on the SOS panel. So we'll preface it with this is like a panel prep that I'm doing with my panelists. But David's a serial site owner. So that means not just one, not just two, not just, well, three. Yeah, you've done even more than three. So that's what serial entrepreneur means, not the cereals that you eat. He
Right.
studies on those too.
Yeah.
But he's one of the smartest dudes I know. He comes from an academic background and he could have gone the route of being a professor. Like, this is how smart this dude is. Your nickname should be the professor. If you don't have a nickname yet,
Uh,
I'll give you that nickname right here, the professor.
I've never told you this, Dan, but I actually worked another company that I worked at. We launched the very first commercially available human exome, and that was my nickname in the launch team. So
Really? You already had that nickname.
I already
Amazing.
had that nickname.
It's
So
a fitting nickname because I just
yeah,
brought it up, like, so
yeah,
that there, no wonder other people feel the same way as I do. But you're one of the smartest dudes I've talked to. You approach site ownership with like scientific rigor. Uh, and your questions, I knew you would be successful almost instantly because of the type of questions you asked. And they're very different than the traditional questions. So, how much do you get, and what do studies pay, and all that, which is important to know also. But yours were like levels deeper. And I knew you had lasting power. And you definitely did because now you're on what, your fourth site or maybe
fifth slide actually.
fifth
Yeah,
in 3 years or 4 years now.
yeah, 4 years.
Wow. So you're doing more than a site a year.
I think it's been accelerating uh, more recently, right? When you have more resources, when you have more experience, when you have more relationships, everything just gets easier. So I look at it in terms of you're moving a flywheel, right? I don't know if you remember these old engines from 19 20s and 30s and 40s where they'd have this big heavy flywheel and you'd push the flywheel and it would first go very slowly and then you'd push it again and it'd go a little more quickly and you push it again and all of a sudden the engine fires up and it starts spinning like crazy. This is it's also described as like snowball effect, right? It's like
A ball, yeah.
as long as you if you as long as you don't give up, if you keep learning and you have that humility to recognize that you're not perfect, you're going to make mistakes and you're going to be wrong. Like that's I think that's important. And another key takeaway is that if you can be somebody that doesn't know or that isn't the idea person, that all of your ideas are your own and your brain is phenomenal, because people can get and me as well can get really uh, can just fall in love with how we think and our ideas and everything. But if you can give credit to other people for their accomplishments, and you can take methods and processes and ideas that other people have put in the work to fully flesh out and to fully develop, and just apply those into your own life and into your own business, then and you don't care about getting the credit for them and being recognized as this really incredible thought leader. I feel like you can go really far that way, because I can only think of a couple of things at a time and really develop a phenomenal system. But as long as you're constantly networking and developing, developing your relationships, and you're doing this with a bunch of people who are all working on the same thing, and you just take all of these things that they're working on and all of these great concepts and apply it into your own lives, and that accelerates your learning dramatically.
I like how you're applying advanced calculus into this interview because you're integrating relationships, which
It's
is the topic of our panel, industry relationships. And
sure.
so you've mentioned that word at least 3 times already. And it's very easy for some to maybe hear that and think, okay, that's just a cliche, but like the more I've done this, the more I realize that is like the main weapon,
Yeah.
not a platitude. And I've been doing this 18 years, and you were able to do in like 4 years what took me like 18 years to do. I think I'm on
That's
my
because you didn't have a Dan Sfera to follow.
there was like Center Watch was
Yeah.
like the source back then, and that was like basically publishing books full of platitudes.
Yeah.
But what do you think about relationships in the context of building your site and specifically like getting studies? Because that's like what it boils down to, really, is how do
Yeah.
we get studies? And
So let me backtrack, because there was a thing that I think would be really valuable to unpack. The approach that I took when I first started my, started my first clinical research site is, I jumped on LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn is an invaluable tool that if you're not on it, you really should get on it.
I think we're in the prime of like this is peak LinkedIn right now.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, there's so many people that are on LinkedIn, and just 4 years ago, maybe one in 10 people at sponsors were on LinkedIn. We're probably around 50% right now. I always, when I'm communicating with people, I always check to see if they're on LinkedIn and add them if I'm not. But I took the approach like maybe like a management consultant would. And so before I did anything, I was just on LinkedIn, and I found every single site owner that would talk to me, and I just had an interview with them. And actually, you introduced me to a whole bunch of other people, and what happens is that everybody's different. Like everybody has like their own little recipe for success. Everybody has their own little way to explain things, but or to explain their successes or their failures or and whatnot. But you do find certain things. You see certain things end up being shared with everybody. Like certain behaviors, certain routines tend to be consistent along a lot of successful people. So those stand out when you start talking with dozens of people, and then it becomes really easy to like, what should you select for? Well, maybe something that someone does is specific to what they're doing, but if this person is successful, they do it. This other person is successful and they do this, and this other person and 24 more, it's probably something you should be doing as well. There's a concept. Are you familiar with the Anna Karenina principle? No. So it's a Silicon Valley phrase. That's the story or the book by Leo Tolstoy, Anna Karenina. It starts out, and I'm going to botch this because I didn't write it down or anything, and I wasn't planning on talking about Anna Karenina. But it starts out, all happy families are happy for the same reason. All unhappy families are unhappy for many different reasons. And what that means is that, and how you can apply that to site ownership, is that you can screw up a company a myriad of different ways. But there's generally a couple of things, a couple of principles that you want to follow in order to be successful. So all happy families are happy for the same set of reasons. It's not like it's just random. It's like the happiness is a decision. It's a choice, right? Success is a decision. Success is a choice. And so once you put together your order of operations and you like put together your plan, those things don't necessarily have to be all of yours. You're probably in an industry like clinical research that's just been around forever, that there isn't a whole lot of innovation. I found that coming up with new ideas is generally not the way to go. What you want to do is you want to find out what works, do that, set up a plan, and then continuously hammer on what works. And like that flywheel scenario is, when you're doing it more, the longer you're in the game, the more opportunities are going to come your way, the more relationships you're going to build, which is going to further give you more and more opportunities, and the more capabilities you're going to develop, which is going to expand your options in the future.
I like that Anna Karenina. I probably should get the book, but I got the gist of it from what you said.
Yeah.
I mean, I did a video this morning on, somebody asked me to do a video on, and they asked the perfect question. It was so vague. Advice for a site director. It was like perfect.
Wow.
podcast.
Yeah.
Oh man, so I went on a 25-minute like just solo pod, and I got into like entropy and how it's a universal law that things
Yeah.
will go towards chaos.
Yeah.
And you actually need to put energy into something to bring order. Just like you
Yeah.
said, there's 1,000 ways to screw up a site and
Yeah.
only like a few to make it successful, really.
Yeah.
It's the same thing, and that requires energy because
Yeah.
entropy means everything goes to chaos naturally. Like you don't have to work very hard to screw up your site.
Yeah.
So I love that Anna Karenina. I maybe not need to read it because I think I get the idea from what you just said.
Yeah, the book isn't a business book, but it's a phenomenal book if you want to read it. It's like 800 pages, so you got to decide, what the highest and best use of your time is. But absolutely, I do love Russian literature of that time, so I certainly am not
And
going
they
to
had to
dissuade
they
you.
had to find beauty. They had to find beauty in the ugliness that was surrounding them.
Yeah,
And I
so
think that's what created like great literature of that era.
yeah, Dostoevsky is another. I guess we're
Yep.
getting off track. I find it hard to read Dostoevsky's writing because I just get so enraptured in the beauty of like in the weight of his writing that I forget who's saying it and I forget what the context is and everything. And then you have to think about like this is also translated. I'm not reading it in the original Russian.
Right.
Anyway, I digress. But the
Well,
Anna Karenina principle is absolutely an important note.
well, I'm like fascinated by how the universal law of entropy it relates to human interactions too, and we're going to get into that because you got to put work into your relationships. But LinkedIn user says, "I love this strategy. When you're constantly developing relationships, you continually make friends with best of breed, making your entire professional experience an ecosystem of specialization." So people agreeing with you, David, and you've made a career out of it and you've hard to believe you've only been doing clinical research like for 4 years, right? You were doing academic work before that.
So I was, if you rewind almost 20 years, I started off doing I was essentially route to become a professor, and I was at the University of California at San Diego. I was earning a PhD, and it kind of like there was a lot of different things happening at that time. I was really interested in this field of genomics, which is, generally if you're doing an assay, you're testing one tiny thing. Like this one protein goes into the cell and goes to another organelle and tickles something, and then something happens, right? But with genomics, what that opened up is the possibility to do tens of thousands of different assays at any given time. And so this is all when the Human Genome Project is coming out, and there's all this potential of like using all this massive amounts of information where you've got the information age impacting biology and medicine and everything that's going to come downstream of that. Like I was extremely interested in that, and I'm looking at the route of being a professor, and I don't want to insult any professors here, but I saw it as like, okay, you become an assistant professor, then you get promoted to associate professor, then you become a full professor, and then you become a professor emeritus, you retire, then you die. And that seemed to be a little less exciting than just kind of going on my own and exploring different things that happen to be of interest to me. So I after graduate school, I went into industry. I initially started off in bioinformatics. I moved into like bioinformatics for sequencing. I took a couple of other jobs working within the genomics industry, a technology called microarrays that are often used also in for their diagnostic potential, and as well as pathology and creating new pathology tests. So immediately prior to jumping into clinical research, what I was doing is I was setting up academic medical center research sites. And so my clients were MD Anderson Cancer Center, Harvard Medical School, UCLA, Mayo Clinic, Johns Hopkins University. And that's what really introduced me to everything that is post-clinical. Well, I don't know, I guess it's technically, the physician
Pre-market. Yeah.
Yeah, if you think, because if you think about it, right, like all of these medications, they start out like with a petri dish and somebody with a pipette, and writing a paper that is then taken by the pharma company, and then they create the drug to initially do the initial phase 1, then phase 2, then phase 3 testing. And I got introduced to that working with clients of mine at MD Anderson and Baylor College of Medicine. So I don't know if I can name drop on LinkedIn Live. I guess there's no.
I know. Yeah.
But anyway, I just learned a lot from my clients, and and a lot of them I now call friends and advisors and mentors.
So, as someone who's done, oftentimes we, like us site owners, us lowly site owners, we get dismissed. Like there's different lenses to view us through. A very popular lens from ivory tower viewing is there should be no such thing as private research. They're in it just for the profits. We're not prestigious. I mean, look at me. I'm wearing camo with a hat. Like I'm at a research clinic. Like it's easy to see how some will look down upon this profession. The counter is like it's very rewarding. I got to literally change lives of employees and patients in my community on a hyper local level.
Yeah.
Arguably more impactful than an AMC might be able to do in the larger reach.
Yeah.
As someone who's done both, like you've kind of been in both worlds.
Yeah.
How do you compare private site ownership to, I guess, the more prestigious type of research where you're actually creating the science, you're hypothesizing? Because as site owners, we just follow the protocols and then we execute. There's no real thinking about the science. I mean, you can. I've started getting into it personally just because I'm interested in it. But how do you compare? Because you've done both, and then which one do you think you like better?
So I think, I like that. That's a good question. I hadn't thought through this, but a few things that pop into my head right now is I feel like you have a much closer connection to the patient. So if you're somebody that likes to that likes that patient interaction and that like seeing improving lives, then this individual site owner is kind of the avenue to take. With the academic research centers, everybody is very, very specialized, and so most of the time, like you'll have people whose their entire job is to accession a urine sample or to just do regulatory, and like the coordinators won't actually have patient interactions. And so they build these beautiful factories of clinical research, but there isn't the same level of your patient comes here and by the time the patient finishes the trial, their grandkids' names and how many goals they scored in their pee-wee soccer. So it really depends on what it is that you're after. But certainly you're not going to publish any papers if you own a clinical research site, right? The CTAs are pretty specific about that. That's their property.
You own no publishing rights. Like it's in every contract. It's a non-negotiable.
Yeah.
At least as far as I'm concerned. As far as I'm aware, it's non-negotiable.
Yeah. And I think you gave me a layup for, I think, a really important story. With that, you're not going to have a whole lot of choices as far as what you do inside the academic medical center route. And and we absolutely need academic medical centers. And I don't want to criticize them because there's also there's a whole other world that would not be available if it weren't for the existence of AMCs. But during COVID, it was pretty much top down from nearly every place that I was working with. So I was working with these AMCs and setting up their sites, and they just decided to shut down almost unanimously. Like there were very few AMCs that just said, "Hey, we're stopping our clinical research programs as of now until this COVID thing blows over and we know how to navigate it," right? And that's what gave me the clue to say, hey, if nobody's running these running trials to find antiviral medication that could be efficacious against COVID-19, then maybe I should do that. So that's when I left my full-time employment and started a clinical research site. And I should also say I have my partner at the time, Lee Eifler. He's still my partner. I shouldn't say at the time, but we started actually, I guess, 2 clinical research sites, one in Detroit, Michigan, and one in Phoenix, Arizona. And what gave us the initial platform was that we developed a patient recruitment apparatus from COVID-19 testing. So patients would come in for COVID-19 testing, and we would recruit patients for COVID-19 clinical research trials to do that, because the academic medical centers weren't actively running those studies. And I felt like there was a need for that. At the time there was a lot of news stories suggesting that the death rate for COVID was in the double digits. And so it's a pretty important time to grab your tools and run towards the fire and help the firemen put it out.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and a big shout out to Lee. You guys simultaneously started. Lee is a serial entrepreneur.
Yes.
I believe these sites were your first foray into full blown just entrepreneurship, right?
Yeah, that's right. I was an employee up until 2020.
So 2 completely different backgrounds, but successful. And now each on your own as well, right? You have your site in McAllen. Lee has the site in Phoenix, and you guys will both be at SOS, and everybody go connect. I guess this is a good place to take a commercial break and say, look, there's only 1 day left for tickets. Tomorrow it's done. Tomorrow is January 12th. We just had a meeting yesterday. The conference planner said I'm physically going in there. This is Jed, by the way, not me. I'm the messenger. We're disabling ticket purchasing tomorrow. So get everyone in today. So I'll probably post a meme or 2 later to get people going. And it's a good commercial break. But do you need industry relationships? Were you as reliant on, in your career in academia? I feel like you can get away without having relationships, or maybe they're not as useful. Am I wrong? Or
so everybody is so, I don't want to use the terminology pigeonhole, because there are people that are overseeing everything, but for me, I was never that person who was the dean of research at an academic medical center. But many of them, at least all that I know of, they actually do have a business development team, and so they're always getting leads as well, because you take a typical academic medical center and you look at the time horizons that they operate on. They're operating on hundreds of years, right? Which is, I think that's something that a lot of people could operate much better in their small businesses if they only operated on time horizons.
The pharmaceutical industry is barely reaching 100 years old.
Yeah,
I think right around now. The pharmaceutical industry as a whole is 100 years old, maybe. So that's crazy.
Yeah, but if you think about it, if you're at Upjohn in the early 1920s, where are you going to go to for you look at Harvard University? It's been around since the 1600s. Or many of these other places, that's they've been around for a long time. So they're looking ahead, and the pharmaceutical industry has been around for, let's say, 100 years or so. They've got 100 years of relationships. And so who are they going to go to? And anybody that's been in the industry for a while, they know if they've done a quality job, if they underpromise and overdeliver, the same clients are going to come back to them over and over and over again. And so instead of getting in front of them, what you can do instead is simply building up your client basket. So, and just to give you a similar story, when I started the site in Detroit, I had a huddle with my business partners. This was about 2.5 years ago. And we kind of discussed that our goal was to become the favorite clinical research site for a certain sponsor. And this sponsor went from being unknown to being a household name during the COVID pandemic. So you probably figure out who I'm talking about.
To figure it out.
Yeah. So
choices.
Yeah. But anyway, if you look at that, like that was the goal. That was 2.5 years ago. At this point, we've got, you can find on clinicaltrials.gov, we've been awarded, I think, our 10th or 11th study from that one sponsor.
Wow.
So that's the thing. If you're, if you are a bespoke, customized, vendor specifically to meet the needs of a client, obviously they're going to be interested in you and they're going to be interested in giving you their attention. Now, how you get their attention, that's a different story, right? Because attention can go both ways. Like there's positive attention, and then there's like you could light yourself on fire and run out in the middle of the road, and you're going to get a lot of attention, but you're not going to get anything from that. So so my approach has always been to get a study. I don't much mind how to get it. If you're on clinicaltrials.gov and you're just blasting out emails everywhere, or if you're going through like a broker service, it's none of those are my favorite ways to go. Or commercial break, going through DSCS and getting study leads from them and following through with each of those are all, like, as long as you get something, the most important thing is that the next step is that you impress the study team and the sponsor. And for many studies, it is like you could become noticed if you recruit 5 or 10 or 20 patients to this trial. In fact, a lot of them, like if it's a study that has 100 sites and they've got to recruit 800 patients, like you would be in the top 10 sites if you recruit 20 patients to a study like that. So,
I think on phase 3 studies, I think you'd be in the top 20% with just 10 patients.
Yeah. So if you were to do something like that, if you were to get everybody's attention, if your investigator gets to go to the next investigator meeting and they call, like they, acknowledge him publicly or her publicly for the excellent work that their study team has done. If you get to that point, like they're going to remember who you are and they're going to send everything they've got to you because they know you can do a good job doing that. And so I think that's a very important thing to focus on, is that if you get something, it's like you put all your lead down range on that opportunity, on that study, and then do everything you can to impress that sponsor. And afterwards, they'll return the favor. You'll be known to everybody in that study team. You can regularly reach out and connect with each of those people, ask if they've got anything else in the pipeline, any other projects that they're working on. The CTMs are valuable people to work with, and you're going to know those people, and they're going to give you attention if you were a high performer for them. And so you keep nurturing those relationships, and they're going to pay off. Now, what's important to think of, because I know I spoke with a lot of clinical research sites when I was relatively naive as a site owner. And I noticed a lot of people, they kind of had this cycle. It's like they would get a trial and then they'd execute on the trial. As soon as they'd hit their enrollment numbers, they'd be like, oh, I finally finished. And then they would go off trying to find another trial. So I kind of took that as like, that's the wrong way to look at it, because if you are a clinical research site, any one of these companies, these are billion and trillion dollar companies. And if you are the preferred provider to one of them, they can keep you busy with plenty of business. And so that kind of gives you the economic engine that you need in order to keep your site going and for you to, keep your patients happy and keep your staff happy. So it's kind of a matter of really investing in relationships with sponsors and keeping keeping those relationships warm.
And keeping your word, like what you promised to enroll, really is the bottom line. Like 10, try to get close to 10. I think within standard deviation of 2, maybe.
Yep.
Um, don't promise 30 and then bring 2.
Right.
I think that's a good way to get looked over next for the next trial, especially
Yep.
when these big pharma. One of the other things I noticed was what makes it easier is after you get your first study, like if you get a big pharma, they'll make you go into SIP, Shared Investigator Portal, which I hate.
Yeah.
But once you set up
Really?
a profile, I can't stand that website. We have, God bless her heart, Katie left. Before her was Daisy. They were the SIP people. But
Right.
I mean, I kid you not, Dave. I went on that website once. I was gonna get a seizure. The thing started having like strobe lights.
Yeah.
I thought I was in a rave, man. And then I was like, no, this is too much right now.
Yeah.
Let's figure this out. But once we got in there, we started getting big pharma approaching us because that's a shared. The
Mm,
shared in the SIP, the S is
yeah.
shared. The big pharma share the info
Yeah.
with the other big pharma. So then you start getting approached by other pharma and say, hey,
Yeah.
we notice you do studies. And so that's kind of a cool thing. It's not really a relationship, but it takes that initial relationship to get your first study. Another mistake I see most site owners make is they are very much eat what we catch, and they don't have a mechanism of scaling.
Mhm.
Uh, so, meaning there's a difference between a plumber who goes out and maybe only has one assistant, but that assistant goes with him on calls, and
Yeah.
he or she can only do the business they're currently working on. And then when
Mhm.
they're done,
Yeah.
now they would need another client.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of sites that operate that way too. Like, oh, I don't need this many staff. It's
Yeah.
just me. And then when the study ends, then we'll go scramble for another study. And I think that's where the
Sure.
spams come in too. Like,
Yeah.
hey, we are such and such, the copy and paste. We're just pray and spray, hopefully get
Yeah.
something, as opposed to investing a little bit into building your system,
Yeah.
have you being able to step out and go hunt while your staff are executing on the studies. I think there are two classes of sites out there, and
Mhm.
they can be various sizes, but one are built to scale and the other ones are built to just eat what they catch. It's very,
Yeah.
very pragmatic, very primitive, but for some people it works. And if that's what works, then that's good for them. But I think there is more, I think they're leaving a lot on the table. And it's
Yeah.
riskier too, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that, like, I put together something of a concept, and I've followed this model. But most sites that I've started, there's generally three owners, and those three have different roles and responsibilities that are based upon what you're describing. And so, instead of like, generally, I fill the role of business development and the business to business international global relations, right? And then there's somebody that's there to manage and maintain and market locally, like patient recruitment, finding and identifying additional investigators. And then there's somebody that's involved in the clinical operations piece. And so if all three of you are working well, and I'm not saying that this is this is good to get something off the ground. There's definitely some challenges that happen like down the road. But if what your challenge is like eating what you catch, and that's it, um, I found that this is kind of a way to at least get over that, because instead of getting a study, doing the work, and then scrambling for another study when enrollment closes, this way you always have somebody looking ahead saying, okay, this study closes in 6 months. What is our staff going to be doing in 6 months? So I've got to get a pipeline. I've got to get something else there, right? And then instead of the operations person going around handing out flyers at physicians' offices, you've got somebody else regularly doing that, proactively doing that. And then the operations person can just make sure things run smoothly in the site. So, it's easier said than done, but I found that is actually a very effective way to start a clinical research site and scale it rapidly.
It's not a bad way to streamline it.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why we wanted to do the SOS. There's so many ways to scale this, right? Like
Mhm.
that's one method. There's other methods of specializing as far as just like the AMCs have specialists, right? Like data
Yep.
entry. I don't like that route because I feel like it is unfair to the staff in a way.
Yeah.
Um, but there's ways to also specialize among specialties too. Like you are team derm, your team cardio. We're not to the point where we can do that, but it's something I have in my head. It's living rent free there for quite some time.
Right.
But there's so many ways to do it. I think the point is just trying and seeing what works. And this is where networking with others comes in handy, because I'll get an idea from you or Lee or Brad or Fox or Chris, and something. Hey, I haven't thought about that. Maybe
Yeah.
that's the right way to go. Does it align with my personal philosophy? Because that's very important too. If it doesn't, I don't necessarily want to do it because I have personal compass inside, but others, maybe it does align with your personal philosophy, and then you can go ahead and try to experiment,
Yeah.
doing clinical trials on your clinical trial company, a split test, A B test.
Yeah. And I think another item, in order to make sure those things work, you want to establish a routine. Like what does your daily habits look like? And something that has worked for me, and I think it's probably works for a lot of other people, is that I just do time blocking within my schedule, and I'll block off Fridays, for instance, and like Friday, it's dedicated to networking. I'm not trying to push any agendas forward. I'm not trying to accomplish any specific projects. It's like the entire week I'm just regularly in communication with various people, and then I put some time Friday into thinking, okay, what am I going to do next Friday, and what calls do I have scheduled for this Friday? And many of those could be reaching out to another CTA.
So Fridays for you is network. That's not hypothetical. That's something you actually do. Fridays for you is network.
So yeah, and it's dynamic as well. I could say at first it was like half of the week was doing that, but it's like that's such an important part, because a lot of my day has been I've had to outsource a lot of what I do to others, and so this is generally a good rule of how to manage your schedule, is that you generally outsource and take on higher and better uses for your time up until a certain point, but you can't ever say, okay, I know enough people. Now I'm not going to continue to do networking. So as of now, I block out 4 hours a day on Friday to network. So that's my schedule. I don't limit it to that. Like I will.
I like that. I like that outsource. I also do similar outsource to focus on the higher value tasks.
Yeah.
However, and this is where site ownership is part science, part art.
Yeah.
There is a time I actually told Katie, who just left. She's going to be SOS too, by the way, because now she's in charge of training other coordinators.
Yeah.
I told her, look, Katie, not everyone has your learning style. And I know yours is like efficient,
Mm-hmm.
but sometimes it makes more sense to not be efficient, at least temporarily, in order to drive home a message or create an outcome that you want. Like sometimes the outcome is in the less efficient route. So sometimes it does make sense to not take on those higher value tasks. For example, a very low value task is driving a patient or picking up dry ice or drawing blood. But as a site director, if my staff, this is for morale, I would say everyone watching can argue that having high staff morale is very high value, right?
Yeah.
If they see me in there in someone's vein because everyone's busy and I'm doing it,
Yeah.
that does something for the morale. Like, oh, Dan's actually doing it. Like he's buying dry ice. He's on our side. That's a low value task I'm doing, but it has a high value impact in the greater scheme of things. So this is why it's like you got to balance. Everything is like art, science. You got to trust your gut to some level. Like you're not going to find all the answers in a book. Your staff's all different. Maybe they value things differently than you do. This is why it's so challenging.
Yeah. And I mean, taking that humility, like, right. I mean, if you're doing blood draws and you're, getting dry ice and doing things like that in order to make your staff members, make their lives easier, it's important to look at them and say, okay, I might be the boss, but you are where I was when I was your age, and you'll probably be where I am now. And It's, when you're my age. So taking that or beyond that,
Yeah.
taking that level of humility and not looking down at people
Yeah.
is, I think, really key. And there was an interesting situation I had recently with a site that we had. We were tooling up for running a COVID flu bivalent vaccine trial, right? So the enrollment was 3 weeks, and there was thousands of patients to be enrolled. There was maybe 100 sites or something like that. So we were like, okay, this is going to be one of these rushes to enroll a bunch of patients, and we're aiming for dozens, if not dozens of patients every single week. Hopefully we'll screen like 10 per day. So there was an important call that we made, and this is like looking for the long-term win instead of the short-term win. And in the hierarchy of clinical research positions, generally like unblinded coordinator roles, like a verifier, or like those tend to be low. Like you need a different skill set. You don't need as much time in the saddle learning things to do an unblinded role. But what we found is that we actually at the time we didn't have a unblinded coordinator that could fulfill like the lead coordinator role. And so what we ultimately decided to do is we took one of our Delta Force level study managers and said, for this trial, you get to be an unblinded coordinator. And the ultimate goal at the end of the day is that we want you to train our 2 unblinded coordinators so that they can be lead unblinded coordinators. And what happened is that we take this high value person that's usually doing things like tasks that require a lot more experience to do these tasks. And what we had at the end of this month is that we had unblinded coordinators that now could handle the lead coordinator role. So we took a short-term loss for a long-term win for the business and for the site.
Yeah.
So
and on paper, like 9 out of 10 consultants, if you had McKinsey consultants or whatever, they would have said, "Oh, that's stupid, David. Like, that's not a good idea. We recommend you do this other thing." But that's a perfect example. Like, and that's where entrepreneurship is. You've got to trust your gut too. Reputation. Here's a question. Reputation is key. How do you balance maintaining a strong and positive reputation without being taken advantage of as a site administrator?
Gosh, I'd love a couple of examples for that, but
because you could be taken advantage, like as by your employees or by your sponsors, or like in what context. But maybe just pick one that stands out to you.
What comes to mind for me is, and I don't know if I have a solution for this, but in the budget negotiation world, it really depends on the study. And sometimes you're really over a barrel when it comes to these vaccine trials, where the study is so valuable to you, the deadline is coming very, very quickly. And then you've got somebody who does not care on the other side of the email chain. And they don't respond quickly. And so there's so much temptation to start to just, compromise on your value and to just to kind of get something, just to get a deal done and get that budget finalized so that you can all sign the CTA and your staff can get working on it. I don't know if I have a good example of that other than saying, like, I think Daniel Fox is brilliant at that item. And so finding people that know more than I do has been what has worked for me.
Yeah, I had an example like this recently. I've been saying that sites are the true patient advocates. So we had a study that enrollment was met, right? Like the sponsor had no interest whether patients randomized anymore, but they said any patient still in screening will allow them to randomize, right?
Yeah.
So there was like a technicality on an X-ray.
Yeah.
And the vendor, it wasn't the sponsor, the vendor said no. And I don't think the vendor even knew about the enrollment. They're just doing their job. But they said, no, the X-ray needs to be redone. And then I said, well, if it's redone, it's going to put the patient out of window. And then the sponsor already told me they don't want out of window randos anymore. So we're throwing away like a good patient because of an exploratory endpoint. Like, the X-ray was still able to have a diagnosis from it. They just didn't
Mhm.
get exploratory endpoints.
Yeah.
So I actually escalated it to the sponsor. And my argument was, look, we're patient advocates. Like, this patient shouldn't suffer because of a technicality.
Yeah.
I know you guys don't need it, but I'm pushing for this. It was a series of emails and phone calls. And finally we got allowed to randomize the patient, but I had to like go fight for it. And was I worried about our reputation? Like a little bit. Like I didn't want to piss off the sponsor. I wanted to get the study back at some point, and it was a risk, but I had to fight for that patient because at the end of the day, like I didn't feel right about the patient having to suffer
Yeah.
uh, because of a technicality. Like that's the patient's first and only maybe experience with a clinical trial. So I brought this all up to the sponsor, and I guess
Yeah.
they got it. So the patient got in,
All
but
right. Okay.
it's like an employee or somebody who maybe wasn't empowered or doesn't want to step on toes. Like, oh, if I approach the sponsor, I might get
Yeah.
fired if it backfires. You
Yeah.
can see how this, like, maybe every day these kind of things happen where patients fall through the cracks because people are worried about their reputation too much. And
Yeah.
I think there's a level of like stewardship and I guess ownership that we have to have as site directors to empower our staff to
Yeah.
fight the patient, like fight for the patient. This is first principles type of stuff. Like, what are we here for? We're here to get patients access to trials. So
Yeah.
that's my example, but there's so many like that, man. That
And I think that the people that are doing what we do, like we fit into a very narrow personality type. Like a lot of people have the same type of people pleasing, approval seeking tendencies. And at least for me, I had to I don't want to say unlearn because I'm still somebody that, am always looking for a win-win situation. Like, if you have some sort of dispute with another person, I'm always looking for the win-win. I'm not looking to strong arm or to like, you know, like, make embarrass somebody or a sponsor or whatever. But I find with a lot of people, uh, there isn't that pushback because there's this fear of consequences, and there's a general discomfort with being assertive. And at least for me in my own career, I had to learn how to be assertive, and it comes unnatural to me.
Mhm.
But as I've started when I started putting that into practice, like, I began getting promoted, and I began earning more income, and I began having additional levels of self-confidence. And so this is something, and funny or not, I just had an annual review with a employee of mine earlier this afternoon, and I brought this up and I put it this way. I'm like, we're kind of cut from the same cloth. I went through the same personal development journey that I want to suggest and empower you to do as well. And I think that's really where things really can take off, and you can be an advocate for your employees by helping them develop this skill set and this ability to continue to grow in their career. Uh,
Yeah.
that's what I think has been made a huge difference for me, and I want to imprint that onto my employees as well.
And it goes beyond you and the company, right? It's like when the employees believe that you are actually on their side, even if it means they are no longer with you at some point,
Yeah,
while they are with you, they tend to go harder as far as effort, attitude, and all those good things that make our lives easier
yeah,
as site directors slash site owners.
yeah.
Yeah, no, this is interesting stuff. Do you feel like you're prepared now for this panel at SOS, or you have like enough nuggets like in your back pocket to be able to put some out? Or we're gonna surprise people, I think, on the panel at SOS with some cool stuff.
Yeah, well, this has been a lifetime accomplishment of mine. 4 years ago, I'm like, one of these days I'm going to be on Dan Sferra's podcast.
Is
So
this the first time?
this is the first time. Yeah,
This is our first podcast, Dave.
I think we've talked about it before, but like just general busyness keeps up
Wow.
with us.
OMG, man. That's that's amazing. That this is our first one. I have to fact check that real quick, but maybe you're right. This
Yeah.
is amazing. It's been a long time coming, and I'm glad you were unanimously selected by like the people deciding who's going to speak.
Yeah.
Um, you were brought up like by myself, by Fox, Chris, probably a few others like mentioned you on this one, industry relations, because in only 4 years as a site owner, you've met so many people, man. Like, and you've built 5 sites, uh, which is commendable, and it's saying a lot. Not bad for an academic.
Yeah. Well, the only thing I'd correct you is that, and this is really important. Important. When you said, and I appreciate everything you said. You built 5 sites. I'm like, this is what's really important is like giving credit to other people. And I mean, there's I mean, my very first employee, I still have her on, on staff. I guess I can't say I have her on staff, but as a contract employee, and
She works for you.
yes, that's right. So I have to say that the people that I've worked with and the people that I've met in this industry have just been extraordinary, and I've learned more from them than I've been able to teach from them. And so, and not no man is an island, right? So you have to like I can only direct people and capital at opportunities, but I can't really make everything happen. So I have to rely on good people to make stuff work.
Of course, but you also have to put energy into the system so that entropy doesn't take over. Your
Exactly.
force must be stronger than entropy. Not
Exactly.
easy to do, man. You can't be sleeping and get that done either.
I love it. The second law of thermodynamics, I believe.
If
Right?
you think about it, man, it applies to everything.
Yeah. Yep.
It's an underrated law.
Yeah. Yeah.
People think about outer space when they think about that. I think about
Mhm.
you. If I don't talk to you for like a year, we forget each other, man. Like, who
Yeah.
is this guy? So
Yeah.
I gotta put in work to make sure I keep a track of what's going on. I make sure I'm giving
Yeah.
more than I'm receiving, like, and then it'll come back. That requires energy.
Yeah. And there's only so much time, right? With the second law of thermodynamics, in an open system, which is the universe, right? Everything's going towards entropy. It's like, it's just coming. Time marches on. But in a closed system, which is yours and my business, a relationship, like that is something where you can input more energy and have more order at the end of the day than the universe at large.
That's where it becomes beautiful. That's the process of creation
Yeah.
and going from 0 to 1 and all that stuff. So, thank you so much, David. Look, if you've been listening or watching, David's LinkedIn is underneath this video. His LinkedIn probably went from several hundred to several thousand in like 2 years. Or I mean, you've been really practicing what you preach. Like
Yeah.
I'm
I
not
mean,
sure.
I've had 1,000 or more before that, but I probably doubled the number.
There
So
you go. Yeah, and that's me through meaningful relationships. I haven't met anyone that has come across you that has had anything negative to say, which is not so easy to do.
I can give you a few references if you want.
Okay, okay. Let's go, man. But David, thank you so much. We're looking forward to SOS. You're going to be on the panel on industry relations, the last panel before the after party, because it's
Awesome.
on relationships and then something about alcohol and networking just kind of
Okay.
lubricates the process, like a little alcohol, and then it just becomes easier to network.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I like for Jameson neat myself.
Okay. Jameson Neat. Yeah, I know Joe Dustin, who's there. Shout out to Joe. He's a huge whiskey advocate, and
All right.
he's been telling me about some of the stuff he's got um,
Okay.
in mind. So looking forward to this after party and SOS. Last day to get your tickets. Go now. Don't complain later. It's not. I don't even know how to log into the website. Even if I wanted to, I couldn't. And then, God forbid, I have to put you on the Google Sheets. I don't know how to log in. Right. So you can't get in. You have to go get your tickets, and then you only have 1 day left. So you might as well go now. Meet Dave, meet a bunch of other people there. Thank you so much, Dave, for coming on. Everybody go connect with David right now. Catch you guys later. Bye bye.